Every season, I give a rundown of what I think are the best builds for each subclass on Titan. Today, we're covering the Season 23 Arc Titan build. Even though this season has nothing to do with Arc, this build is strong as ever. While it is important to match surges for endgame content, knowing how a build works and what it excels at is just as important. When it comes to Arc Titan, it stands out as one of the best ad clearing builds. They can also output a ton of damage during boss phases. It excels at generating a ton of ability energy from ionic traces and adding Jolt into the mix to spread a ton of damage to nearby enemies. And because of how much ability energy we can generate, we'll be choosing Heart of Inmost Light, or HOIL, as our main exotic. Since this season brought a nerf to the amount of ability energy we can generate from mods, I do have a few helpful tips to increasing your overall damage and ability energy that you can generate, so stick around for those. Remember, if you find this video helpful and you like seeing build videos and other Destiny 2 helpful content, leave a like on the video and consider hitting that subscribe button. With that being said, let's jump right on into it. As I mentioned, there are a few things that we want to keep in mind to take full advantage of this build. First up, we want to use our other abilities to power up our main abilities. For example, if I want to throw a grenade at a boss, I want to first use my class ability and then my melee, and then we throw our grenade. With HOIL, we gain increased melee and grenade damage based on how many other abilities we used right beforehand. Melees can get an increase of 10% with 1 stack and 20% with 2 stacks, whereas our grenades, they gain 20% just with 1 stack and 35% with 2 stacks. Since we are getting this increase in damage, we'll be amping up our grenades as much as possible to output the most amount of damage. Secondly, because our mods got hit pretty hard and they're only generating about half the energy they used to, plus orb generation also took a big hit with a 10-second cooldown, I have a workaround to keep your ability energy up. I've mentioned in a few of my videos before that when you melee an enemy and get them to low health, knockout kicks in, and it makes it so that your unpowered melee counts as a powered melee. And in the past, we've used this to generate infinite orbs. But this is still relevant for this build. Since we now have a 10-second cooldown on orb creation, I'm still using this method, but for a different reason. See, HOIL not only gives us an increase in damage, but also 400 to 800% ability regeneration rate. And that's both for our grenade and our melee. While our powered melee is strong, we mainly want to take advantage of that 800% regeneration rate for our grenades. Since we typically use our grenade last, we should already start regenerating class ability energy. So after we use our grenade, we want to use our class ability to gain an empowering stack, and then we use our powered melee to gain another. And if you don't have your melee up, that's okay. We just need to break shields on an enemy. That way we now have a powered melee that is infinite. And then we just keep meleeing over and over again to keep our empowering buff up. This also works if you don't have your class ability. When you use your powered melee over and over again, it will get you up to 2 stacks and keep it going. At baseline, because we always have access to a powered melee, that means we can have on-demand access to 400% increased grenade regeneration. And if we use our class ability or use our melee again, we up that to an 800% increase. Continue to melee to your heart's content, and you'll get your grenade back in no time. This baseline increase, plus ionic traces, and the mods that we put together, I was getting my grenade back every 7 to 10 seconds, and the lowest that I actually found was roughly 5 seconds. So let's break it down. Taking a look at the super and the abilities. First up, our super. We're going to take Thunder Crash. Thunder Crash is definitely better for boss DPS and mini bosses. And since we are using a chest exotic, we can hot swap it for Curus of the Falling Star for double damage, but that's only if you really want to. Alright, for our abilities, first up I'm taking Thrusters. They have a quicker cooldown and they offer more movement. Plus this goes great with the armor mod Powerful Attraction, making it easier to pick up orbs around you. For our melee, you have 2 options. Seismic Strike is a great option. Since this build offers health regen on a melee kill, we want to be close to targets. So this will not only close the gap, but also add blinding to the target if it doesn't get killed. The other option you can run with is Thunderclap, and personally, I like Thunderclap a little bit better. Basically just for the way it feels, but use whichever one you want. For Grenade, we are going to be using Pulse Grenade. Not only does it do the most damage, but it also generates ionic traces, giving us back more and more ability energy. Alright, moving on to our aspects. First up, Touch of Thunder. This is what makes our Pulse Grenades now create ionic traces and deal more damage over time. This is a grenade focused build, so this is a no-brainer. Pairing it with Knockout makes it so that our melee attacks start health regen and also make us amplified. This is also what gives our unpowered melee up to count as a powered melee after critically wounding an enemy, and gives us the ability to keep our HOIL buffs up constantly. Alright, moving on to the fragments. First up, Spark of Magnitude. This is going to increase the duration on our pulse grenades, making them a little bit stronger and dealing more damage overall. Then I'm also pairing this with Spark of Shock so that our arc grenades are now going to jolt targets. This jolt is not only going to do more damage, but also generate another ionic trace, giving us more ability energy back. And that's because of Spark of Ions, where when we defeat jolted targets, it creates ionic traces. So now our grenades are going to generate more ability energy, and we can also put this with a Volt Shot weapon, making it so that our weapons can also jolt targets, creating more ionic traces. This does have a 10-second cooldown, but it still comes in handy. And finally, we're pairing it with Spark of Resistance so that when we're surrounded, we're more resistant to incoming damage. Since we do want to regen our health with our melees, we usually are going to be surrounded a ton. So getting that extra 25% damage resistance does feel nice. All right, let's talk about ways to improve the build. First up, our stat mods. We are going to take 100 resilience. This extra 30% damage resistance is key for surviving, and it is going to shorten our cooldown for our class ability, which with HOIL is pretty important. After that, I'm shooting for 100 recovery, or rather 70. Since we will be using Font of Restoration, that's going to give us an extra 30 recovery whenever we have armor charge. I'm usually shooting for 70. Staying alive with this build is harder than most solar restrained builds, so it is super important to have as much recovery as possible to gain our health back as quick as possible. After that, we're obviously going for discipline. Since we do want to throw our grenades as much as possible, discipline is a high priority so that we can get our grenade cooldown as low as possible. All right, moving on to the armor mods. First up, our helmet. We are going to take hands-on or ashes to assets. Hands-on will make melee kills generate more super energy, and ashes to assets makes grenades generate more super energy. We're going to be using both pretty much equally, so use whichever one you want. Both are going to give you just more super energy overall. After that, I like to pair it with either 2 harmonic siphons, but depending on my weapons, I might take 1 kinetic and 1 harmonic, or 1 strand and 1 harmonic. Mainly depends on what my primary weapon is and what I'm using in that first slot. And this is now going to make it so when you get rapid kills with your weapons, you're going to generate orbs. All right, moving on to the arms. First up, I'm taking Focusing Strike, so that we gain 12% class ability energy when dealing powered melee damage. It's hard to say exactly how this is calculated since they did change the way ability energy is given. It's no longer a flat 12%. It actually depends on how long the ability recharge rate is. So basically, if you have a lower cooldown, it's going to give you more ability energy back. And since our thrusters are going to be a very low cooldown, getting that 12% back is actually going to be pretty massive. It's going to help us get our other abilities back pretty quick. I also like to pair that with impact induction, so we're gaining 12% grenade energy when dealing melee damage. As I mentioned, it's hard to say whether it's actually a full 12% energy, and there is a 7-second cooldown on this, but since we want to be meleeing a ton to start our health regen and keep our HOIL buffs up, it's a no-brainer to use this mod. And then finally, I'm pairing this with heavy-handed, so that powered melee final blows create orbs. This can no longer generate infinite orbs. However, like I said, we do want to continuously use our melee, so generating more orbs will now happen as well. All right, moving on to the chest. I am taking 3 resistance mods. Usually I go for 1 melee resistance and then 2 elemental resistance. And it usually depends on the content I'm running, so pair it up with whatever you're running. All right, for the legs, I'm going to be taking Absolution so that orbs reduce our cooldown for all of our abilities by 5%. We will be using all of our abilities a ton, and like Ionic Traces, this is just going to give us more ability energy for all of our abilities. And because it's a HOIL build, we want to use all of our abilities a ton. I also like to pair this with Recuperation so that now we're gaining 70 health whenever we pick up an orb. This build does struggle a little bit with survivability, so getting that extra boost in health is definitely massive. Finally, I like to also pair that with either a Surge mod or Innervation. If you want to use your weapons more, use a Surge mod, but if you don't really care about matching weapon types, Innervation gives you a flat 12% boost to your grenade energy. That paired with Absolution means that every time you pick up an orb, you're getting 17% back for your grenade. And we should be making a ton of orbs with this build. Finally, for our mark. First up, I'm taking Bomber. This is going to reduce our grenade cooldown when using our class ability by 12%. We do want to use our class ability, and a lot of times we end up using that before our grenade, but there are plenty of times you'll get your class ability back right after you throw your grenade, and you can use it again to get another boost to your grenade energy. And then I also like to pair that with Powerful Attraction. Like I said before, we are using thrusters, so now whenever we use our thrusters, we're collecting nearby orbs, which are not only going to give you back more energy and health, but it's also going to help with our last mod, which is going to be Font of Restoration. This is going to give you an extra 30 recovery whenever you have armor charge. And this should be consistently since we are using Powerful Attraction and plenty of ways to generate orbs. Getting up to 100 recovery is definitely massive because when you're only at 70, you're only at a 23% recovery rate. Whereas once you hit 100, you're actually at 43%, and it drops the time that you need to take to recover by a ton. All right, moving on to the artifact. This season, it isn't really focused on arc, so there's only so much you can do. The first option is going to be Blast Radius and Argent Ordnance. These two are good since I usually like to use a waveframe grenade launcher and rockets with this build. This will make your grenade launchers and rockets grant armor charge on multi-kills. And when you fire a rocket, you get a 15% stacking rocket damage bonus. If you're running a strand weapon, then you can also take Unraveling Orbs and Horde Shuttle. And this will make it so that when you pick up an orb, you're granted Unraveling rounds. And then when you deal weapon damage to unraveled enemies, Threadlings spawn. Like I said before, we're generating a ton of orbs, so this should be pretty much consistently. All right, let's talk weapons. Before I mention which weapons I like, there are a few perks that I like and are important for this build. So first up, Volt Shot. After getting a weapon kill and reloading, the next time you damage a target within 7 seconds, it jolts that target. This is great for this build because not only does it add more damage and extra ad clearing potential, but it also creates an ionic trace, which is going to give us more ability energy back. Secondly, I also like attrition orbs. This is going to make it so scoring multiple hits against enemies creates an orb. Since we get a lot of ability energy, more health, and extra recovery with orbs, this is pretty massive. And then finally, Demolitionist, where scoring a kill grants 10 to 20% grenade energy depending on which weapon has Demolitionist, and throwing a grenade reloads that weapon. So for our kinetic slot, one option will be the New Pacific Epitaph, which is from Ghost of the Deep. This is a Waveframe Stasis GL, and it can roll with Demo, which is going to give us more grenade energy and make it super easy to reload. Plus, since it is a grenade, if you have the artifact mod on, you're going to be getting more armor charge. You could also take Perpetualis, which is a strand auto from Season 20. It can roll with Demo and Keep Away, which is going to give you a strand option to take advantage of those other artifact perks. In our energy slot, Forbearance is a great ad clear weapon, but we have to talk about Undercurrent, which is the new Arc Waveframe Grenade Launcher from the Nightfall this week. This weapon not only hits hard, but it can get Demo in the first column, and then it can also get Volt Shot, Adrenaline Junkie, or Attrition Orbs in the second. Plus it has Vanguard's Vindication, which will give you 7 health on every kill. This weapon might be the new best Waveframe Grenade Launcher. If you want a primary option, Oversoul Edict from Kuroda's End is a great option, since it rolls with Demo and Sword Logic or Adrenaline Junkie. You could do that, or you could run it with a roll that's Enlightened Action and Volt Shot. Another great option is going to be the Subjunctive SMG. The more I've used this weapon, the more I like it over something like the Aikilos SMG. It can roll with Threat Detector and Volt Shot for quicker reloads and adding that extra jolt to get more ability energy back. Alright, for our heavy, to be honest, any heavy will work since we aren't really using surge mods, but I'll still list a few that I like. First up, we have the Hothead. It's still an amazing rocket for outputting massive damage numbers, and it can roll with Demo and Explosive Light. Another legendary arc rocket launcher is going to be the Crux Termination. This is a world drop and it's kind of hard to farm, but if you can get a roll with Reconstruction, Envious Assassin, or Slide Shot in the first column, you have a ton of options in the second. You can either go with Surrounded, which is a little bit more dangerous but outputs a ton of damage, or we also have Bipod and Explosive Light. Any combination of those are gonna be pretty good. You could also take Song of Iriut from Kuroda's End, which can roll with Rewind rounds or Reconstruction, and then I'd pair that with either Bait and Switch or Target Lock. Another fantastic option is going to be the Dragon's Breath. It's a very good option for solo DPS, and it also creates Fire Sprays, which are going to give you more grenade energy back. This build offers a ton of fun while being able to keep up with a ton of categories. We can do massive boss DPS by hot swapping to our exotic, plus we'll be doing even more damage with how easy it is to amp up our grenade. We create a ton of ionic traces and orbs of power with ease, which will funnel back into our build, giving us more ability energy and make it easier to cycle back to our grenade, which is going to be absolutely decimating everything. We get high survivability since we can start health regen on any melee kill, and whenever we're surrounded, we're going to gain extra damage resistance. Since Season 23 isn't arc related, I probably won't use this build a ton, but when I want to change it up, this is a solid build to have in your back pocket. Let me know your thoughts of the build. What would you change or how would you improve it? That's it from me. Peace out.